Hello everyone, this is Yana and thank you for stopping by. This video was inspired and influenced by the Rainbow Card Challenge started by Don Wolslegel from W+9, and I was actually tagged by the amazing Debbie Hughes to participate and create a card. So the idea of the challenge, and by the way, anyone can join. You don't need to be tagged, you can join at any time. So the idea is to use rainbow colors on your card. I first created two cards, very similar. The only difference was in the technique that I used, and then I decided I should probably do a video and show you how I made those, although they are very simple. So I made two more projects and I filmed the process to turn into this video. So I'm sharing four very similar projects today. The technique that I'm using has to do with distress inks and their properties, and this is actually inspired by the Summer of Creative Chemistry classes from onlinecardclasses.com. I'll have links in my video description down below and also on my blog to everything and everyone I mention if you want to take a closer look. So I'll be using identical supplies to create my cards, but two different techniques. And I'll be honest with you, one of those is actually all about fixing mistakes. I made a background, I messed it up, and then I fixed it by adding more distress ink. I'm going to be using distress inks and I'm going to work with a couple of colors to create a rainbow background. Now, I don't have all colors of distress inks. I don't think I need them all. I have a couple of colors that I just adore and I use them most often, so I'm going to pick from those colors to create my rainbow. I have seedless preserves, peacock feathers, crushed olive, mustard seed, wild honey, ripe persimmon, and I'll also use worn lipstick. I'll actually lose one of those colors for my second card, but completely by accident. So for the first card, or for the first technique, I'm going to blend distress ink onto the background with an ink blending tool. On my first card, I did my ink blending horizontally. On the one I'm doing right now, I'm going to blend my ink diagonally just for additional interest. You can see I have my heat embossing coming in from the corners, and that I think would work better if my ink blending is done diagonally instead of horizontally. Although it does look fine here, it doesn't look out of place. I'm going to be working on distress watercolor paper because it's the best paper out there for this particular ink and just because it works better. I also like to use distress inks on other kinds of watercolor paper, but I don't like to use them on arches. I never have the result that I'm going for on arches paper, although I love that particular paper for all of my watercoloring. I've started blending ink onto the background, and I'm using a mini round ink blending tool and blending the ink diagonally in a rainbow order. I'm overlapping the colors quite a bit, but I'm not spending too much time blending. I will be adding water later, and that water will blend the ink for me, so I'm not being very careful here. Overall, it took me about 4 minutes to blend this background, so this doesn't take much time at all. And once I blended the first layer of colors, I went back and blended some more color over it just to intensify it. I love my colors really bright and vibrant, so I always try to have the most vibrant color possible. And these distress inks are pretty vibrant. Once this background is done, I'm going to set it aside and let it air dry. I will be doing some heat embossing on top of it, so I need it to be dry. I will use my heat tool later, but while I have the inks out, I'm going to work on the second background, so the first one has some time to dry on its own. For my second background, I'm going to do ink smooshing, and this is probably my second favorite technique with distress inks. I love it because you always have a different result, and as long as you stay away from colors that turn muddy when mixed together, you always have beautiful backgrounds for your projects. If you've never done ink smooshing with distress inks, this is how you do it. You'll need a piece of clear plastic or clear acetate. I have a small one and it was actually trimmed from a piece of packaging. I always keep it in my distress ink tin together with my inks, and I reuse it over and over again. So you'll need to press the ink pad onto the acetate to get some ink out. Not too much, but not too little. Next, spritz this with water to dilute the ink, and go ahead and transfer this onto the paper. For a small section like this here, I like to spritz the ink only once. This way I don't have too much water, I do not dilute the ink too much, and it gives me just the perfect ink puddles on my paper. For me, this is a very controlled way of adding distress ink onto the background. I can clearly see where I'm adding it, and by swiping the plastic on my paper, I can also move the ink around and create bigger puddles if I need to. I also like to dry the ink after I've added it. I'm not making it bone dry, and even if I did, distress always reacts with water, so it will reactivate when there's water on top of it. But I am drying my paper because I don't want to pick up the previous color with my plastic piece when I go to apply the next one. So this is the only reason I'm using my heat tool in between the colors. So you've probably noticed that I messed up a little bit here. I have some drops of ink where I don't want them, or where I didn't intend to have them. You can try to remove them with water, but I'm actually going to keep them there to add additional interest to the background. Now my second rainbow background is done, and again I'm going to set it aside and let the ink dry while I work on my first background again. I want to do some white heat embossing on this background and emboss a few flowers and leaves, and I've been inspired by Yusun Hor to try this. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name correctly, but I hope I do. Now, Yunsun does this amazing overlap heat embossing. You'd think that you'd need a mask for the first image to heat emboss the second one if the two images overlap. But she doesn't use a mask, and she makes these fantastic backgrounds. So she inspired me to try this on my projects. I'm going to use Simon Says Stamp Summer Garden stamp set and emboss a couple of flowers and leaves onto this background in white embossing powder. So first I'm going to zap this background with a heat tool to make sure it's dry, and then prep it with an anti-static powder tool. This is very important, and this tool does wonders for heat embossing. There are a couple different tools like this, and they all work great. So what this tool does is it eliminates the static on the paper and also eliminates the grease and oils from your fingers and just helps to keep the embossing clean. I never do my heat embossing without this or a similar tool. I'm going to go ahead and stamp the first image, cover it with embossing powder and heat set it. I love this flower. It's a gorgeous one, and I'm going to stamp the second flower right next to it, and I'm also stamping a leaf, and you can see I'm overlapping these images. Usually I would be very afraid to stamp and overlap images like this, but after I saw Yunsun do this, I really liked it and I decided to give it a try, and I'm not afraid anymore. I forgot to mention that I'm using clear sticky ink to ink up my images. I usually use Versamark ink, but my ink pad is too dry and I'm waiting for a new one to come in the mail, so I'm using my older but still good and juicy ink pad today. I'm going to continue stamping flowers and leaves on the background, and I'll also stamp identical images on the second background with the ink smooshing. I'm not going to show you all of this as it took me quite a while to do that, and I don't want this video to be too long. The heat embossing went outside of the ink smooshing on my second background and it got lost. It was obvious from the start that it would get lost, but I just didn't realize it, so I still heat embossed the images going outside the colored zone. To fix that, I went back to my distress inks and I ink blended the same colors onto the background to help the images show. Now I first blended with a light hand only, adding a little bit of ink to the background. But I did go back later and added a heavier layer of ink. This created a nice background with a combination of ink smooshing and ink blending, and I really like this result. I think I'll be using this technique combo again soon. The magic of distress inks happens when you add water, as it reacts with water and creates beautiful inkless spots or lighter spots where the water is. Distress is the only ink that does this beautifully, and I've actually did something similar with Alt New inks, and I'll link to that video if you want to take a look. But Alt New inks do not react with water quite as much. So if you want to achieve this look, use Distress inks. I'm using a large paintbrush and adding large drops of water to my background. The general rule here is the larger the brush, the larger the drops. The smaller the brush, the smaller the drops you will get. I'm also using a paper towel to soak up some of the water, and I'm coming in with a wet brush directly to the paper and adding water specifically where I want it. In the end, I added quite a lot of water drops to both backgrounds, and I also trimmed the ink smooshed one using a stitched rectangle die from Simon Says Stamp and my die cutting machine. After my backgrounds were dry, I adhered them onto card bases. I adhered the larger one directly onto a white card base, and the one that I die cut, I foam mounted that one onto a card base made out of white wood grain cardstock. For the sentiments, I'm using word dice from Simon Says Stamp. I have summer, enjoy, and hugs here, and I'm cutting each word twice. So once out of black cardstock and once out of double-sided adhesive foam from Scrapbook Adhesives. This last part helps to add dimension to die cuts. I always use foam squares to foam mount at least a small part of my card, a little die cut for example, but these are too detailed to be foam mounted using individual foam squares, so I'm using these foam adhesive sheets. If you don't have this, you can make foam adhesive sheets yourself by using regular foam in whatever color you need, plus adhesive sheets like adhesive sheets from Scrapbook Adhesives or Stick It from Ken Oliver, and just make your foam sticky on one side and also make your cardstock sticky on one side. This way you will have adhesive to adhere cardstock onto the foam, and then there is still adhesive on the foam to adhere it onto the project. You can also die cut this word multiple times out of black cardstock or whatever color of cardstock you're using and adhere the layers together by either using glue or again by adding adhesive sheets to the cardstock before you cut it. So there are a couple of options and I use both, but I do prefer this double-sided foam adhesive option best. I'm going to adhere my word die cut onto the rainbow background, and I also want to add additional sentiment. I have this sticker sheet from one of my card kits from Simon, and I'm going to use a few stickers from here as additional sentiments for my cards. I'm foam mounting one longer sentiment and adhering the smaller one directly onto the background. Now, Debbie Hughes was the one who tagged me to join the Rainbow Card Challenge, and she also was the one who used the translucent rainbow colored sequins. Those are also from one of the Simon's card kits, and I completely forgot I had them. So I dug them out. They were still in my card kit box. I put them in my little sequin storage, and I used them for these cards. They are perfect. The colors are vibrant and yummy and just ideal for summer. So this finishes my video for the Rainbow Card Challenge. I was super excited to join, and I even did a little happy dance when Debbie tagged me. I'm going to tag May Park and Amy Lee. I think they will rock the rainbow, and I'm also inviting all of you to join as well. You don't need to be tagged to join. Feel free to create a rainbow card and share it with the world. If you're interested in the products I used, I have them linked down below in my video description and also on my blog. Here are a few more fun videos on my channel featuring distress inks. First one shows distress ink smooshing. The second one shows stenciling with distress inks. And the third one is a fun galaxy-like background over a stencil, again using distress. Be sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet done so, and thank you so much for watching.